Well, hello and welcome back to RADTV. In this second part of the programme today, we're going to be talking about false flag attacks. Now, if you've seen our earlier part of the programme, you'll know that many people are saying that this apparent chemical attack in Damascus was a false flag attack, which means that the alleged perpetrators are not actually the perpetrators, and that actually in this case it would have been the rebels letting off the chemical weapons so as to get America in on their side. That's how false flag attacks work. Now, history is full of false flag attacks. There are even people who say that wars always start with false flag attacks because you can't persuade a country to go to war unless it thinks it's being attacked. And that's certainly the case in America's history. There's always an attack on America before they go into war, and quite often it turns out historically to have been a questionable incident, to say the least. The US libertarian leader Ron Paul, very high profile guy, big following, he has said that he thinks most likely the Syrian attack was a false flag attack, which would mean that the Obama White House are either extremely stupid or lying to get America to carry out these this illegal attack, proposed attack on Damascus. But there are cases of false flag attacks where everybody agrees, and I'll mention two. One was when the Second World War started, when Germany attacked Poland. Well, actually, Hitler claimed that Poland had attacked Germany. That seems laughable with hindsight, because of course Germany was 10 times as strong as Poland, and they went on to invade Russia and occupy most of Europe. But that is what happened. Germany claimed that they were acting in self-defense and that Poland had attacked Germany at the beginning of the Second World War. And there was another incident of a false flag attack, very different, took place in Egypt in the 1950s, and it's known as the Lavon affair. And what happened then was that Israel set off terrorist bombs in Egypt and set it up so that it looked as if militant Islamic terrorists had carried out the attacks. And the idea was to encourage Egypt to support Israel and make peace with Israel. Well, we know that actually it was Israel letting off these bombs because they admitted it. They were caught red-handed, an Israeli team setting off the bombs. They were caught red-handed by the Egyptians, and after a long struggle against admitting it, Israel finally did admit it. And the person who admitted it was a certain Shimon Peres, who is to this day a leading politician in Israel. So we know that Israel did this in the 50s, and we also of course know that Israel would have a lot less trouble doing it now when their influence in the Western media and in Washington and London is so much more powerful than it was in the 1950s when they were a new country. And then of course you've got the Reichstag fire, when Hitler seized full power, and the apparent anarchist who started the Reichstag fire is generally considered that that was manipulated by the Nazis. But you've guessed it already, there is another event which many people think was indeed a false flag attack, but of course the Western NATO media adamantly deny this and won't give any space at all to anybody who thinks this, and that was the 9/11 attacks. And it's coming up to the new another anniversary of the 9/11 attacks, September the 11th. We may be at war in Syria by then, but no doubt they'll be remembered with their full glory, and it is the sort of glory that the 9/11 industry, you might say, reminds us of the 9/11 attacks. Already we've had programs on Channel 4 claiming to be telling us the full story of 9/11. So the 9/11 Truth movement is still very active, more active than ever this year, with a massive campaign of billboards. Roy, can you tell us a bit more about this?
Yeah, we discussed this last week, but I'll go through it again because we were reporting it was going to happen, and now it has happened. So it's a thing called Operation Tip the Planet, and this is an initiative of architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. You can find them on the web at architectsandengineers.org, and it's called Rethink 9/11, and they've raised $225,000 across the world, and they've got advertising campaigns in 12 cities across the world, so in Australia, Britain, America and Canada. And we have in London here, we have five posters up. We've got one in Commercial Road, which is a big backlit billboard, and 4 on the underground around Old Street. So we were all out there. They went up on September the 2nd, so the 9/11 Truth Movement were out there taking photos and videos. So we took the opportunity to go out and leaflet and engage the public with it.
I suppose the problem is that there's so little support from anybody in the establishment in the NATO countries, isn't there? You've even got people like Noam Chomsky, who should know better, saying that it's ridiculous to think that anything but the official story could be true.
I think a lot of people think about their position in the media. You know, Noam Chomsky is quite a powerful man. Chris Hedges, Glenn Greenwald. You know, there's lots of even Julian Assange, really. You know, a lot of these people won't touch 9/11. I'm sure they know the truth, but they judge that if they talk about 9/11 truth, their standing in the media will drop, really.
Right.
And I believe they just feel they can get more truth out by staying above that, really. It's the rabbit hole, and it's deciding where you stand, where you think you can best get the information you want out.
Well, there's a guy who I met from the New York 9/11 Truth campaign, and he's a pupil of Chomsky's. He was a pupil of Chomsky's at university, and he says it all started with the Kennedy assassination, which of course many people think was a conspiracy. In fact, most people think was a conspiracy.
Well, a court has ruled that it is a conspiracy now.
I didn't know that, but anyway, it started with that because Chomsky was so far out on the left in those days that he thought Kennedy was a horrible person, and he didn't really care whether he was assassinated or not. So when everybody started discussing, you know, whether it was a conspiracy or not, Chomsky and his crowd of leftists, of far leftists, they all thought, well, this is a distraction from American imperialism in Vietnam, and to some extent they might have been right, although of course the Kennedy supporters say that Kennedy would have stopped Vietnam, and that's one of the reasons he was assassinated, was because they wanted to get the war going in Vietnam. So we've now in a position, quite a long time after 9/11, quite a lot of campaigning by the 9/11 Truth campaigns, and there are many of them, many different ones with different positions about 9/11. We're now in a position where Ron Paul, very senior US politician, is saying Damascus was probably a false flag attack.
Yeah, and Pat Buchanan as well, who's a 3 times presidential advisor, he's coming out and saying it was a false flag as well.
He's quite a respected guy in America as well, isn't he?
Yeah. But if you in May of the time of the last chemical attack in Syria, Alex Jones did a Google search on the term false flag, and since 9/11 it's been growing steadily, slowly, and then during the last chemical attack in Syria, the Google search terms for false flag just went exponential. It just went off the chart, really.
Right.
So the term false flag is now understood by the public, which is a huge huge step forward in its own way, really.
Yeah. So finally, Roy, could you just give us a few details for anybody who wants to follow us up and join the get involved in the 9/11 Truth campaign?
Yep. Well, if you go to rethink911.org, they've got all the pictures of all the billboards up there and things like that. They've also got the official Rethink 9/11 video, which is only 4 minutes long, but it's narrated by Daniel Sunjata and Ed Asner, which are both
famous figures on the American scene.
Yeah, both famous actors.
Did you know that a third tower fell on 9/11? At approximately 5:20 p.m. on September 11, 2001, World Trade Center Building 7 collapsed in 6.5 seconds from normal office fires, according to the government's final report.
World Trade Center 7 collapsed because of fires fueled by office furnishings. It did not collapse from explosives or from fuel oil fires.
Later, the government finally admitted that Building 7 collapsed at the rate of free fall after trying to deny it. So what's wrong with a building in free fall? What is free fall?
It's just like taking your car keys out and just dropping them. That's how fast the building came down, for over 100 feet.
This is high school physics. A building cannot do free fall with 40,000 tons of structural steel in its structural system without it being blown up.
The only way that a building can accelerate as it collapses is by having pre-engineered, precisely timed, and precisely placed explosives. In other words, controlled demolition.
Normal office fires not only dropped a steel-framed skyscraper for the first time in history, and did so at freefall, according to the government's report. They also burned hot enough to create the molten metal observed at ground zero.
You'd get down below and you'd see molten steel running down the channel rails, like you're in a foundry.
In an office fire, you cannot generate enough heat to melt steel.
So if you have a flame at 750 degrees, you can hold that flame under a steel beam forever, and you'll never reach a high enough temperature to bend steel, let alone melt it.
First of all, let's go back to your basic premise that there was a pool of molten steel.
Like lava.
From a volcano.
I know of absolutely nobody, and no eyewitness who said so, nobody who's produced it.
John Gross categorically denied their observations. He not only ignored evidence, he denied evidence.
The government acknowledged that Building 7's collapse was unprecedented. Engineers were also stunned. Yet somehow, news networks and many others knew it was going to happen. CNN reported the collapse an hour before it happened.
We are getting information now that one of the other buildings, Building 7, in the World Trade Center complex is on fire and has either collapsed or is collapsing.
And a few blocks away,
Keep your eye on that building, it'll be coming down. This building is about to blow up. Move it back.
Now, more on the latest building collapse in New York.
the BBC even reported the collapse in detail live from New York over 20 minutes before it happened, with Building 7 still standing in the background. Immediately after Building 7's collapse, FDNY Lieutenant David Rastuccio had this to say.
We had heard reports that the building was unstable and that it eventually would either come down on its own or it would be taken down.
CBS veteran anchorman Dan Rather and others also had their first impressions, which were only broadcast on that tragic day.
For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
And I turned in time to see what looked like a skyscraper implosion. It looked like it had been done by a demolition crew. The whole thing just collapsing down on itself.
You don't need to be an engineer or an architect to see what happened to those buildings.
The most obvious hypothesis for anyone looking at the films is that the buildings came down because there was very carefully controlled demolition with high explosives that had been planted weeks, if not months, before.
9/11 claimed thousands of lives and touched millions more. It led us into 2 wars and was used to scale back our civil liberties and invade our privacy. But many people are beginning to question what we were told, and we are demanding answers. So how do we do it? We find our own voices and then we raise them together.
There's been hatred, there's been fear, but there's been no justice for the people who were killed on that day. We must have an inquiry to find out what really happened.
The official accounts of 9/11 are false.
This is so important that you've got to put your usual sources on hold for a while.
You take it slowly, just slowly digest it, slowly accept it.
When the most likely hypothesis in the case of Building 7 wasn't even mentioned.
They didn't talk about Building 7. Nobody mentioned it. And it wasn't hit by planes. So why did it go down?
What I want to persuade you to do is look into it, right? And make up your own mind.
Rethink 9/11.
Rethink 9/11!
Perth, Australia supports
Rethink 9/11!
Join us and millions around the world who are now learning about the evidence and uniting to rethink 9/11.
There are many different theories about what really did happen on 9/11, and the more I think we would say perhaps the more sensible campaigns are simply calling for a reinvestigation, because even when there's a lot of information out there, it can't be communicated to the public. There's various theories. I've got my theory. I wrote a book on 9/11. I've got my theory about it, but I'm not going to go around expecting people to believe my theory, you know, because they've got to do a lot of work to find out. All we can ask for is a reinvestigation, really.
But that's what's so good about architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, and they've got a great DVD called Blueprint for Truth. You can find it on YouTube, and that looks at the fall of the buildings from a scientific and engineering point of view. It speculates on nothing else.
They just want to know how those buildings collapsed. And as architects and engineers, they're saying the official story can't be true, so what did happen? It looked like it's a controlled demolition. Was it? And if it wasn't, then what on earth was it? Because we haven't had a proper explanation yet for 10 years. Might also mention that it's now been admitted that the CIA were protecting the alleged 9/11 hijackers prior to the 9/11 attacks. We don't know why they were protecting them. It seems unbelievable that they didn't know what they were up to. If they were protecting them, they must have been watching them.
Well, a couple of them were living on naval bases, weren't they?
Allegedly living on naval bases.
And living with FBI
The BBC
informants.
reported that the hijackers of Flight 77 was staying in a motel right outside the American National Security Agency, which makes it look as if they were doing rather a bad job of sort of didn't want to quite put them up on the premises, but put them on the motel outside. Anyway, it's another story for another time. Thanks very much, Roy.
Thank you.